Imagine having to leave your family behind, having to cross 9 countries in 1 month, not knowing if you'll ever reach your destination or if you'll ever see your family again. Imagine being one of those 4.8 million Syrians who now have to live in another country. VRefugees is the virtual reality simulation of a Syrian's journey from Syria to Germany. The project started with interviews to several Syrian refugees who have done the journey themselves, over 50 hours of interviews and focus groups. Together, we made a collective narrative that has then been translated into a virtual reality simulation. Why is this even important? Well, it's important because of the numbers of refugees internationally. If all the refugees in the world were located in one geographical location, it would be the 22nd largest country in the world, sitting between the UK and France. These are 65 million forcefully displaced people, and of these, there are 20 million refugees. I can explain better these distinctions at the end for whoever's interested. Not only is the scale of the issue very important, but so has been the social and political response. Keep in mind that over 87% of refugees actually live in lower and middle income countries. So the so-called European crisis is not really a crisis when you compare the number of refugees in Europe with a population of over 500 million is almost the same as that in Lebanon, which now 25% of their population are Syrian refugees, not taking into account Palestinians living beforehand. The aim of this project is to highlight these discrepancies. It's to educate based on reality rather than sensationalism and put the viewer into action by putting them into the shoes of the refugee themselves. How the simulation works is that the viewer puts on the headset and then they become the refugee. While we have many interactive components, such as if you reach too far out in the boat, you risk falling down, or if you look up, the typical VR components, we have also tried to maintain as much fidelity as possible to the story itself. So you follow the journey of these several narrations as if it were just one. The whole point is not to make a game out of suffering, but to make education more interesting and more memorable. It's one thing to read a 2,000-story news piece about this journey, and it's very different for you to become the protagonist, for you to have things happen to you in the same way that refugees have things happen to them, and they do not choose throughout the journey itself. My passion is using business for social good and integrating cross-cultural cooperation with technology interaction. So that's why we chose VR as a medium to express this. And sometimes when we watch humanitarian-themed documentaries, you see the suffering of the other. You watch it as if it were a movie, a video that something else has happened to the other. But we chose this immersive experience to eliminate exactly that sense of detachment. This video is different from others precisely because of this, but also because we're using a collective narrative. There are many other very nice videos. There's, for example, 8 boarders. In 8 days, they track a single mother going with her 2 children into Europe, but that's one story. Similarly, Clouds Over Sidra, it's a very popular UNICEF 360 video. It shows the story of a camp. Keep in mind that over 80% of refugees are actually urban refugees. They do not live in camps. That's just what's been highlighted in the media because it's more visually appealing. So that's why we chose this very different medium of the journey itself. It's to highlight as well the dangers and the cost that it takes. As I mentioned, it takes over a month to do this journey, and it costs between 3,000 to 5,000 euros. The average wage in Syria right now is 30 to 80 euros per month. So an entire family has to pool in their life savings for one person to make this extremely dangerous journey. I'll show you a small demo of our video. This is just a preview. This is not exactly how the video itself will be. You won't be able to float over. You'll always be able to only see the video as if you were a person yourself. But in this preview, we wanted to show later on there's a boat of people in risk and drowning. It's based off of 2 of the interviews where the boat before them and the boat behind them sunk, and they couldn't do anything. Because of the limitations of our team, we don't have a very high realistic video, but through artistic components, we're building empathy. For example, during this component of the journey, you'll see the boat will slow down and you'll see a little teddy bear pass by, and that's to represent children drowning throughout this process. In terms of website, we already have a website set up, and on it, it'll be educational components, including history backgrounds and everything on a journalistic case. Every interview has remained anonymous because we want to protect the families of those who still have most family members in Syria and in Turkey, so it's dangerous, although it would be interesting to hear from them directly. In terms of marketing strategy, most of our current partnerships are actually with international organizations such as the UN and the World Bank, because that's my background, as well as a think tank called European Horizons. It's a consortium of over 42 universities across the US and Europe, which will spread the video together with their partner networks. But the whole point of this is to educate others. It's for whoever is not working actually with refugees or studying this topic. So a second component will be to have it as a traveling exhibit throughout tech companies and to basically excite people in educational purposes and to be more involved. In terms of how we're spreading it, because of the low cost and easy shipping, we're starting with Google Cardboard to send it to schools and universities, and also as a medium to increase technology within schools. But in the long run, hoping to actually build more permanent exhibits. Right now, we're talking with the House of European History, which has just opened in Brussels in May, as a potential of having a permanent exhibit that will have many more interactive features, with a launch date in mid-fall, because that's strategically when universities have already finished their orientations, and high schools as well, but it's before exam season, so that's when students mostly are trying to figure out what club to be in, when to participate, and that's when the action component comes on exactly. In terms of goals, we have 3 main ones. One is to build empathy. Because this is based on a true narrative, and the simulation really hopes to demonstrate the different steps that one has to take. Keep in mind that out of 5,300 refugees, which died in 2016 en route worldwide, 3,700 drowned in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean and the borders of Europe are actually the most deadly borders for refugees worldwide. Number 2, it's spreading an accurate representation of what a refugee has to do to even come to Europe, let alone begin the integration process. And finally, building an action point. So we intend to build an app or an online survey at the end of the application, when the person has viewed the video and they have been, hopefully, moved by it. You answer a very quick survey based on your geographical location, based on your interest and skill set, and that will be sent directly to 2-3 organizations that need help or donations, and then they'll get in touch with you on how you can act. So it's also as a funnel for more help towards NGOs. In terms of future goals, we would love to actually build even more simulations for other journeys. While I was explaining the building of this process, I had questions such as, why are you only focusing on Syrian refugees? They're not the largest population worldwide. Why are you only thinking about the Middle Eastern region? How about the Northern Triangle in Central America? How about the Rohingya in Burma? So there are many other stories that are left untold, but we hope to take lessons learned from this specific simulation and then hopefully apply it to educational purposes for other aspects. And lastly, our team is working at the University of Maryland VR lab, but they don't have a computer of their own. So if anybody has a company computer that they don't want anymore, we can help you be eco-friendly and donate it to us instead of throwing it away. They're using an Asus G11CD, so if you have something similar, we'd love to. Number 2 is to spread it as much as possible. The whole point is not to educate those who already know about it, started, but those who are, for example, interested in many other topics. So having it on as many platforms as possible is extremely useful. And finally, any kind of in-kind services or help that you would like to be involved in. We're still trying to build the app, so if you would like to help build the app, we're definitely up for volunteers and more help to continue on this journey for education. So if you have any questions, any participations, feel free to send me an email or organization email. And I kept it short, so you can ask me more questions if that's interesting. Okay. Always a good sign when you don't have questions. I covered everything.
Awesome. Oh, sorry. So why was it Syrian refugees that you chose to follow the story of?
Because of the media attention that it has received and because of the inaccuracy. So there's been this perception that hordes of Syrian refugees have entered the EU. The truth is not even half a million of Syrian refugees have entered in the EU out of 4.8 million. So my question was, why is this gathering so much attention when in other regions it's not? And so it's strategic in terms of capturing that media attention, but infiltrating it with accuracy. And that's why this was the first group chosen. I can expand on how to do a humanitarian project for VR, how to build a diverse team working remotely. Yes?
Yes, I guess, could you tell us a little bit how you got started? What was kind of the triggering thing? Like how did you get the team together and all of that?
So I wrote my master's thesis on company interventions for refugee employment. And while I was going about my research, I noticed there was such a huge misunderstanding, even of people working in the field, even of researchers who have spent sometimes their life studying refugee flows, and they haven't spoken to a single refugee. So as well as looking at videos, there's some moving content on 360 video around this issue, but from a ethical perspective, it is not that ethical to photograph the face of a person in a moment of distress. That can never be taken away from the media, and that's a child who will be labeled a refugee for their whole life. So that was where it started, seeing these discrepancies, both in knowledge as well as in content. And how we started, my background is not technical whatsoever. I'm international relations. But I went to a hackathon, and I met a team who built a VR library in 36 hours. And I said, that is so cool. Do you guys want to partner on this other thing? And then that's how we started. Initial funding, I won the Yale Social Entrepreneurship Competition in February, and we got $4,000, and that's what the whole project is running on, just that grant. In comparison, there's an NGO based in DC. They did a 360 video of Burmese in Rohingya Burmese, and they spent $100,000 doing that 360 video, right? This is animation. So many challenges. I can expand on the challenge. In terms of team, hackathons have been one of my best friends, and finding people who are enthusiastic and ready to help out. At the same time, DC is not exactly a technological city, so the VR meetups and the projects are very niche, and the same 20 people show up to the same things. So it's just about always showing up, and in the end, they gave up to this random IR person asking them about tech stuff. Yeah.
What's the goal of the final VR experience? Is it supposed to be realistic, or actually like this abstract way, which I find is actually better representation, because you don't pretend to be realistic, you pretend to be an abstract representation of that journey, so you don't think you actually experience it. It's more like an approximation of what's happening. I mean,
can you repeat the question?
I mean, what's the goal of the final VR experience? Is it supposed to be like this realism, or more of an abstract version, like the visual representation of people? Are they more like human life beings, or like you actually see that they're not real people, but you're in that situation, in an abstract version of the situation?
Yeah, so that's one of the issues that we had in choosing animation over 360 video, that it does detach from the sense of realism and full immersion. But what we're doing with the artistic components is to add empathy effects that can be added even if you don't have full fidelity to the video itself.
But I think it's actually better to not pretend you're actually in a situation, because you can't really, like, might be traumatizing or something to some people, and you don't want to do this, but you get an idea of what it could be in reality, but you don't pretend that this is a real situation. I mean, that type of thing, maybe. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of partners for the support, like the UN, and I think the World Bank was also there. What are your learnings and tips for approaching them for such projects? And yeah, what's
tips?
Yeah, exactly.
It's extremely difficult because they have very strong bureaucratic process, and the UN especially is very resistant to any form of technology. They have a VR humanitarian lab, but it's run by one 360 VR superstar, and to get in touch with them, it's through going to talks, and then those people have been to Singularity University, and they've met that one person, so it's kind of a lot of going to events and talks. I was very lucky because I live in Washington, D.C., so the World Bank is 10 minutes away, and it's open to a lot of events, so it sometimes helps to have a remote partner in a critical city. New York is at Geneva, UNHCR, the High Rights Commissioner for Refugees, is in Geneva. So having remote partners that do the bulk work of going to these events and pushing yourself and always introducing, at the same time they want to finalize product most of the times, unless they are in the reins of building the whole thing, which is what some of, like the UNICEF video, for example, it's called Clouds Over Sidra. Unless they're in the reins of building the whole thing, they want just a final product that you can give to them, and then they say, okay, I'll consider partnering with you too.
Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned about 50 hours of interview material that you used. Did you do those interviews, or where did you get them from?
I did at each interview personally.
So you went to Germany and interviewed Syrian refugees in Germany, or?
I did 4 interviews over Skype and 3 in Germany itself.
Wow.
As a sideline, to even find people willing to talk to me was extremely difficult. I went through traditional routes of contacting friends who work at NGOs with refugees, and not a single one approved this process. To be allowed to talk with refugees are considered vulnerable populations in academia, so to get that approval is extremely difficult. So it's actually through, if you work on these projects, the best thing is to contact a community leader. So I had a friend put me in touch with a Syrian journalist who was very well known back home, and he had friends who went through that journey. And after asking over 30 people if they were willing, there was one that said yes, because they had been quite abused by the media and were unwilling to talk to anyone related to the media, anyone living in the US. But with that one introduction, then they introduce you to the people they've met along the journey and to other friends that they've had. So if anyone doing a sort of humanitarian project, it's the best way is actually to ask a leader. To identify that can be difficult, but it's often people who always talk at panels that can be useful.
Thank you.
Might it be an option as a higher goal to film it at some point, or do you want to stick to this abstract kind of way?
Of course, I mean, as much content as there is on this material out there, that's the best possible. It's not in video because I personally don't have that capacity. I don't know how to recreate wartime Syria and develop a Spielberg-style movie, but if somebody is able and wants to, 100%. It's just this content and this style and everything of this was based on our personal limitations as a team. That's all.